So for me, one of the great joys getting into whisky was building a relationship with a distillery. And so today, alongside looking at these two versions of Deanston 12, we'll also talk a little bit about that. So, welcome back to the Loft, come on in. I'm Jamie, nice to welcome you here. There's been some renovations, as you can see. The shelves are up and all my whisky is now displayed for you to see. I've put the Springbank in pride of place, of course, as is tradition on YouTube. So when you first start getting into whisky and you go to the supermarket, you sort of start to learn what you like and what you don't like. You pick up this bottle, you pick up that bottle. And then from there you start to have a little bit more of an interest. You do some research online, you find out a little bit more about this, a little bit more about that. You go to shops, you start talking to people. Maybe you go to a festival and you try some different things there. And you move from being a casual sort of whisky observer into being a kind of knowledgeable, passionate person about the spirit. Then you find that one bottle that you really like. It really means something to you. It ticks all the boxes. And then you start working through the core releases, the 12, the 15, the 18, the 21. And then you discover their special releases and their distillery exclusives. And you work your way through and you really start to build a picture of what this distillery does and all the different spirit that it produces. And then finally, you go to the distillery itself and you get to smell the smells and see the sights of that distillery. Go to and see your own reflection in the copper stills and see where all that spirit that you've really enjoyed drinking over the last months or years is made and created. That's a similar story to the one I have with Deanston. It was one of the really early bottles I picked up when I first started learning about things like E150A and chill filtration, and the Deanston 12 was that bottle. I bought it quite a few years, not this particular bottle, but I bought a bottle of it quite a few years ago now, and ever since then it's always been on my shelf. It's permanently had a home there. And since then I have tried so many different types of Deanston. I've bought so many different bottles, really enjoy the 18, and I love a lot of the kind of organic special releases that they've done, as well as having the chance to try some of the distillery exclusives and single cask things. And that is a real joy of whisky, building that relationship with a distillery. It's so much fun and it's so fantastic. And one of the real reasons that I kept going with whisky was because I started building relationships with those distilleries and with the spirit that they were producing. And I don't feel that that's true with so many other things that we consume. Certainly when you buy food in the supermarket, you're not really building much of a relationship with the producers. Maybe you might build a relationship with someone who produces your favourite cheese or something like that, an artisan product or a bakery. But for me, I've never really built such a strong relationship as I have with the whisky distilleries that I like the most. And the final step in that process is visiting the distillery itself. Of course, it might be the first step in that process. It was a trip to the Talisker distillery that got me going in the first place. But when you've been through years of consuming a whisky, of trying all the different iterations, and then you get to visit, it really makes for such a special experience. You get to see the stills. You get to go into the dunnage warehouse like you do at Deanston, because they've actually got one there, and smell those smells, smell the whisky maturing in the wood, and it is fantastic. So a few years back, Deanston 12 was causing a lot of fuss on WhiskyTube. It was very popular. Ralphie gave it his Whisky of the Year accolade, and a lot of people were talking about it. And that seems to have died down a little bit. It isn't quite getting the attention it once was, and I don't really know why that is, because in my mind it hasn't become any worse. It's not deteriorated in quality. If anything, it's only improved. And the output of Deanston as a whole has improved as well in that time. So I'm surprised it's not quite getting as much attention as it was. Perhaps these are just fashions, they come in waves. But I wanted to talk about it because it's always been on my shelf, and even though it's always on my shelf and it is one of my favourites, I have found myself reaching for it slightly less recently. And I did sort of wonder why that was. And for me, it should be always talked about in those great value bottles that are fantastic for beginners and purists alike. For me, it's still one of the best value whiskies out there, and still provides a huge amount to talk about and ample flavour too. So let's have a look at Deanston 12. Here we go, here's the bottle in all its glory. I'll hold that up there and hopefully you can see that. Now, because it's natural colour, we can talk about the colour of it. And I think one of the most interesting things that I've noticed about Deanston 12 over the years is that the colour does change, it fluctuates. And that's fantastic, I think, because it shows the integrity of the product within. This is quite dark, and actually I've got another bottle back there which I think might even be even darker. And all this colour is coming from the wood. Now, I like talking about colour. I think it's important. I think it does tell us something about the whisky. What it tells us here, I'm not sure. How active the casks are, perhaps. What the wood's doing. Whether we're getting more of those woody flavours. It'd be interesting to know. Compare a very pale Deanston to a much darker one and see what happens. On the nose, you get that there's a shortbread kind of note. Cereally as well. Sweet, creamy. There's citrus in there, lemon, ginger, and plenty of sort of wood char and resin and vanilla. It's very, very lovely on the nose. Very, very nice. Very well balanced, I think. And then on the palate, you get way more of that spice, way more of that wood spice, the kind of the ginger notes and a really kind of creamy, thick mouthfeel. It's really, really solid stuff. Actually, when I wrote some notes for this video, I wrote the notes late at night, and it's now sort of the middle of the day. And I'm getting so much more off the palate than I did when I first wrote those notes. Kind of goes to show how tired your palate can get at the end of the day. So that is lovely. Like I say, really is one of my favourites. One of the best out there for value. And one of the best to give, I think, to beginners as well, and newbies to whisky, to show them variety. You compare that to a Bunnahabhain 12, perhaps a Tobermory, or a Glencadam, and a sherried whisky like a Glenallachie 12, or a Glendronach 12, say, as a kind of beginner's sherried whisky. You really get an interesting lineup in difference in profile for all those whiskies, and it's a good introduction, a good way of showing people what whisky's all about. So, following my discovery of Deanston 12 and enjoying that for years, I then delved into single cask Deanstons, of course, trying to discover more of them, find out more about the bourbon maturation that goes on at Deanston. And the 12 itself is fully bourbon matured. And I think that is one of Deanston's really, really strong suits. They get the best out of the bourbon wood, and they bring out all those fruity, creamy flavours that you get from them. Now this here is an Old Particular single cask Deanston, 12-year-old as well, similar colour as you can see, non-chill filtered, natural colour, and this one is 48.4% compared to the Deanston 12's 46.3%. So a little bit stronger and single cask as well. Now this was a revelation to me when I first tried it, and other single cask Deanstons. What you get from them is really quite magnificent. So if I just have a smell. It's this incredible fruity, creamy vanilla custard note. It really is absolutely magnificent. Every time I try these single cask Deanstons, whether they're independently bottled or not, I'm just absolutely blown away by them. I've got a distillery single cask behind me as well, sort of an official bottling, and that's the same, very, very similar kind of profile. It's full of fruit. It's full of like stewed fruit, apples, pears, that vanilla, creamy vanilla note that comes through. For me, it's like a fruit crumble and custard. That is the thing. That is the thing that I get from this. And if I was eating some fruit crumble and custard, I'd want one of these to go with it because it's such a perfect match and accompaniment. This, I have to say, was one of my favourite whiskies of last year. I tried it at Kendal Whisky Festival, which happens to be a festival I help organise, so cheeky little plug there, I'm afraid. But it was the one from that festival that really blew me away of all the ones I tried that weekend. So I had to go out and buy a bottle, and I'm so glad I did because I absolutely love it. I might have to go and get another one actually because if they're still available. Last time I checked, these are still available and cost around £65. It's like the 12, the official bottling 12, but just amped up a little bit more, just ramped up. You get the kind of single cask nature of it and its own idiosyncrasies that come with it. In terms of scoring these two, let's just give you some little facts. The Deanston 12-year-old is around, you can get it for under £40 if you look around. I think RRP's at around 40, 45, but you can certainly find it for under 40 on a good day. It's 46.3%, non-chill filtered, natural colour. The 12-year-old Old Particular independently bottled one here is 48.4%, and it costs around £65, so it's quite a little bit more money. Whilst it perhaps isn't as good a value prospect, it really does deliver on flavour. So scoring these two, well, as this is just an old favourite of mine, I have to give it quite a high score, and I will. For presentation, it gets a 5. It does all the things that I want it to do. That's why I bought it in the first place all those years ago. For value, I think it represents fantastic value for money, and so I can only recommend it from that point of view. So 5 on both of those fronts. And then from a flavour perspective, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Now perhaps that doesn't sound fantastic, but I think that is really, really good. It's solid, it's above average, and a really fantastic whiskey. So that's a total of 16. Then this Douglas Laing Old Particular, I really, really like this. In terms of quality, it's going to get a 5 from me. You know, ticks all those boxes. Non-chill filtered, natural colour, etc. Good strength. It's single cask as well, so very high quality. So value-wise, I appreciate £65 is quite a lot, and for some, it might not represent as good a value as the official bottling of Deanston. But I do think you're getting a bit more for that money, and it's single cask, and it really is fantastic. So I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 for value. And then for flavour, like I say, it was my favourite whiskey of last year, or certainly one of my favourite whiskies of last year, and I really enjoyed it so very much. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10, which is the biggest score I've given for flavour in my notes thus far. So that gives us a total of 18, which I think is also the biggest score I've given to any whiskey so far, even those much coveted Bunnahabhain cask strengths. I really, really enjoy this one. It's for me, subjectively, it's absolutely fantastic. And if you can get hold of a bottle, I really would recommend it. Like I say, I think last time I checked, there were still a few around and available, so that's fantastic. Thank you everyone who's watched to this point. I'd really appreciate it if you could like the video, and if you have enjoyed this, then please do subscribe. It'd be fantastic to welcome you back here again in the future. So, without any further ado, San Shiva.